Welcome back, everyone. We're here again with Dr. Michal Siegal. We're discussing stories of Minim for heretics in the Talmud, and I think we can jump right in. So very excited to be here. Thank you, Dr. Siegal.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Let me just share my screen. I'm very happy and excited to be here again. And can you see my screen? Good. So I'm happy to see you all, and I just want to say once more that this talk can be heard independently of the previous one. But just like the previous one, I'm very happy to hear from you. If you have any comments or any questions you want to ask, please feel free to use the chat or to email me later on. I'm happy to always hear from people who listen to my talk. I know that this is it can be a lonely task to talk to myself for an hour on Zoom. So I'm very, very happy to hear from people who listen to my talk. So this is where we're at. So what we did last time, we put some time into understanding the corpus of Minim stories or heretic stories in the Talmud. We talked about insults and the categories of outsiders, heretics, by talking about a few words that are used in this kind of stories, such as Minim, but also fool. And we talked about parallel terms such as hypocrites, and we talked about blind fools, and we talked about Dorshei Halakot in Second Temple literature in Qumran. And we talked about semantic fields in which you create a corpus of text in which the other, right, the one you're arguing with, is being called a name, right? A name of a heretic or a name of a fool. And we talked about fool being not mentally impaired, but rather theologically challenging, right? Theologically wrong or leading people astray. And we talked about Minim stories or heretic stories, which we will dedicate this talk and the talk next week, which are in my books that this series of lectures are based on my book. Where I try to look at these stories and try to understand the genre of literature, right? What's the category of stories that talk about heretic stories in which the rabbis present themselves as talking to another, right? To a heretic, to a fool, someone who's mistaken, right? So this kind of literature and the Minim stories in the Babylonian Talmud, the heretic stories are part of this genre of literature. And today, we're going to talk about one of the stories next week. But what's important for me is that while talking about Minim stories or stories of rabbinic figures and their meaning with heretics, I'm basically claiming that this is a representation, in fact, not of the actual meetings between heretics or Christians in this case and the rabbis, but actually a literary representation, in fact, of the actual connection between Jews and Christians in the ancient world, meaning someone knew the composer of this knew about Christian tradition and composed the story, but it's based on historical realities of the time. This is where we talked about the map, right? This is the area in which the Babylonian Talmud is redacted, right? Modern day Iran and Iraq, the two rivers leading into the Persian Gulf, the Euphrates and the Tigris, leading into the Persian Gulf, and the Jewish area, which is right about here. These are the green, the Jews are in green, and the Christians are in blue. And what this map, which I'm proud of because I'm the first to actually create it, this map, which overlaps Jewish areas and Christian areas together, basically shows the Jews and Christians in that time. And the Babylonian Talmud that is being redacted and created in this area. The Babylonian Talmud, which is being created in this area where the Jews live, is really being created in the area where Jews and Christians, you can see the blue in this area of the Christians and Jews live side by side, and the Babylonian Talmud represents this interaction, this knowledge of Christian tradition, this knowledge of Christian biblical interpretation to be. I see someone saying, Kaya, that they can't hear me very well. Is that true? Should I?
It's been a little bit choppy for me, but I think I've been able to make out what you've been saying.
Let me know if I need to.
I think, yeah, it might be. I'm wondering if it will be better with.
I'm having a hard time hearing also.
Okay.
So
So
let me take
the
off.
question is just whether that's an internet issue or an audio issue. So yeah, maybe if we try without the earphones, that might help.
Let me know. Hear me?
I think
Now
there's a bit
without the earphones, is that better?
I'm not sure.
You're choppy?
A little bit. I think there's a bit of delay. It seems like it might be a problem with your internet, not with the audio input.
Let me see.
Oh, Noah is suggesting sitting closer to the mic. It's an audio.
Okay, is that better? I'm closer. Is that better?
Yeah, I think that's better. Hopefully it will hold up.
Okay. Okay. So basically, and this is interesting because this is what I called from text to people, right? So we're going to use the Babylonian Talmud and the text about heretics talking to rabbinic figures as a way to ask a question about Jewish-Christian interaction in this area. How much did the rabbis or the rabbinic figures composing the Babylonian Talmud know about Christianity? And we're going to use rabbinic stories about encounters with heretics to talk about this. And I'm going to give an example today, and this is the question that's going to interest us, right? So this is the question that, historically speaking, is of interest to me, right? So what did the Babylonian Talmud tell me about Jewish-Christian interaction? And in what way does it tell me about this? What do I learn? Is the audio okay now, Chaya?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Please signal to me if you can't hear me, and I'll try to fix it. Okay, so let's start today's talk, but again, reminding us of a few vocabulary words, right? When we're talking about minim, min is a singular of minim plural, literally meaning heresy, but minim stories appear in all over rabbinic literature, and scholarship does not believe that min can be translated into one term. Min does not mean Christian. Min does not mean Gnostic. There isn't one definition of what a min is. It's probably a range of heretical views portrayed in the mouth of someone. And we talked a lot about last week about the question of what does it mean to call someone, what does it mean to call someone a min, right? So what do we mean by that, right? Well, what's the use of an insult, or the use of a term, or use of a nickname does to this group of people with heretical views. And again, this is a representation of my book, which you can see on the slide, and a kind of a summary of it. Even though Minim stories appear all over rabbinic literature, the vast majority of them appears in the Babylonian Talmud, and this is what I'm focused on. This is the focus that is of interest to me. And the story I chose for today is a story found in tractate Yevamot. Right, this is quoted according to Manuscript Munich, and we're going to read straight from the translation into. We're going to read the translation into English right after I read the Hebrew as well. So we'll do both. So the story says, just start like this: Amar lehahu mina leRabban Gamliel. So a certain min, right? Again, what does a min mean, right? This is a heretic, right? A certain, again, this wordplay doesn't work when I teach this in Hebrew, right? So I'm going to enjoy this while I can in English. And what does a min mean? So this heretic, says to Rabban Gamliel, this is Ama disfalafle mare. You are a people, a nation, whose master, mare, has performed chalitza for it. And in a second, we'll talk about what does chalitza mean exactly. But he said, you had the ceremony of chalitza performed. Why? And he has a proof text. The proof text is from Moshe. בכתיב, כבצונם ובבקרם ילכו לבקש את אדוני, ולא ימצאו חלץ מהם. And this is a quote from Hosea. With their flocks and their herds, they shall go to seek the Lord, but they shall not find him. He has chalatz mehem. He has drawn off from them. Right? So the word literally means chalatz means drawn off, right? He was gone off of them, but the word is indeed chalat. So the min learns from this about the ceremony of chalitza. And in a second, we'll talk about this. So Rabban Gamliel says to him, I'm going to read the whole story and then we'll translate and go slowly to the details. And Rabban Gamliel says back to him, Amar le shoteh. Right? So he says, Rabban Gamliel says something, fool. We know this term, right? We talked about this last week. Fool means someone, mistaken. Miktiv chalzulo. For is it written they drew for him? No, chalat mehem ktiv, right? It says him he has drawn from them. Deilu yevama dechalzula achi mide Michal sheikve. Right now, in the case of the yevama whose brothers drew off her sandal, could there be any validity in the act? Now we need a few more details to understand the story, which we'll go over very slowly now. So if you haven't followed so far, that's okay. We'll start from scratch. By the way, there's a few manuscript differentiation that you can quickly look at in the footnotes. But let's talk a little bit about what we're talking about. So what stands in the background of this story? So this background of the story is a ceremony called chalitza, or taking off of the shoe. And this is is there a problem with the? What's the feedback?
Thank you, Yael, for pointing it out. I think it's been resolved. I think it should be fine now.
Okay. So the ceremony we're talking about in this, as you can see, a wood carving from the 18th century from Amsterdam. We're talking about a ceremony in which a shoe has been taken off. So what is this ceremony about? So we're talking about something. By the way, this is my husband and me in the famous library in Ireland, and this is a picture from a 13th century Bible, and there's a depiction of the ceremony of the chalitza, where the takes off the shoe. And what are we talking about when we're talking about taking off the shoe? So this is based on Deuteronomy 25, and in Deuteronomy 25, the Bible describes a certain situation in which, and let's read the verses and explain what we're talking about. So this is the ceremony that comes to resolve a certain situation on the ground. So what's the situation? People are still complaining about the audio. I'm so sorry. Should we try the earphones again? Am I close enough to the mic? Can't hear you, Chaya.
Sorry. I think that this is still better than it was with the earphones. I don't think going back to the earphones will help. I think, to me, it sounds like it might be, actually, that might not be true. I'm not sure what we can do to improve it. The only thing I can think of is that if there's an internet problem, then both you and anyone else who is having trouble can try closing any other things that are taking up internet bandwidth for them. But I think that Jessica says that she is all right, and I'm also finding it like reasonably clear. So I think the best thing we can do is just to plow on.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So in any case, so the Bible tells us the following stories. If a brothers are living together and one of them dies, right? So there's two brothers and they live in the system that's described in the Bible as a family living close by, and a brother dies and he doesn't have any kids. Okay? So the Bible says, כי ישבו אחים יחדיו, ומת אחד מהם, ובן אין לו. לא תהיה אשת המת החוצה לאיש זר, יבמה יבוא אליה, ולקחה לו לאישה ויבמה. Right? So if a brother dies and he has no kids, his widow will not go out of the family and marry someone outside the family. What will be done to her? The husband's brother needs to take her and marry her. And this is what's called a yevama, right? This is the ceremony of yibum, right? Yibum, where he marries his brother's wife. Now, the reason for that actually is a very social reason, right? So first of all, it means that the property stays within the family, right? We don't take it out of the family, and we keep it together. But socially, it's also a kind gesture for the wife, because women widows were very often left alone without protection and without financial, and this is a way to help them, right? To keep them in the family and take control of them and give them a support system and belonging. This is but And then the first son she bears with the new husband, the husband will carry the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. So that's the purpose also, that the son that is born will carry on the name of his dead father. Now, what happens if the man doesn't want to marry her? He's happy with his wife. I don't know. He doesn't fancy her. They're not friends. He doesn't want her, right? So what happens? He said, אם לא יחפץ האיש לקחת את יבמתו, ועלתה יבמתו השער על הזקנים, ואמרה, מאין יבמי לקחת לאחיו שם בישראל, לא אהבה יבמי. So however, if a man doesn't want to marry his brother's wife, she shall go to the elders of the town gate and say, my husband brother refuses to carry on his brother's name in Israel, and he will not fulfill the duty of brother-in-law to me. Right? She said she's upset. He doesn't want to marry him. So the elders of the town will summon him and talk to him and try to convince him. And if he's persistent saying, I do not want to marry her, so his brothers, and then this is what happens. So if the yibum doesn't happen, a chalitza happens. So what's the chalitza? His brother's widow shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, take off one of his sandals, spit in his face, and say, this is what is done to the man who will not build up his brother's family line. So there's a ceremony of like disengagement between them, right? She takes off his shoes, she spits in his face in disgust and say, you are not willing to do what you're supposed to do. And this, breaks the ties between them, and she's on her own. And this mentioned line shall be known in Israel, the family of the ancestors, right? So this is the ceremony of chalitza. Now let's go back to our story. So when we look at the stories in Yevamot, let's look at what happens. So in fact, the story describes a situation in which a heretic, comes to Rabban Gamliel and says, God decided to perform the ceremony of chalitza, taking off the shoe and breaking off from you. He did that ceremony to you, to the people of Israel. Why? And then he looks at Hosea and in Hosea when it says that God turned away from Israel, the term that's being used, the verb that's being used is chalat, which is the same as taking off of the shoe. So the heretic here is very philological in nature, and he does this midrash where he says God has performed the ceremony of chalitza. He has taken off his shoe. He has broken off from you, and you are no longer God's people, right? Because God doesn't want you anymore. He has done the chalitza from you. Now, Rabban Gamliel answers her by saying, you fool, right? You are mistaken. You are theologically mistaken. Because if you look carefully at the verse says, chalat mehem, right? It says he has taken off from them. He says, listen, in the chalitza ceremony, the brother's shoe is taken off by the woman, right? So if you are the one performing the chalitza saying, I don't want you anymore, the shoe is taken off by the other side, right? The wife, the woman. And in this case, the verb doesn't work in the verse because it says, chalat mehem, he has taken off the shoes from them, as if God has taken the shoe from the people. That doesn't work halachically. If the husband, if the brother, says Rabban Gamliel, if the brother takes off the shoe from the wife, the chalitza doesn't work. It has no halachic validity. So this midrash about God performing chalitza to people doesn't work according to halachic details. End of the story. And this is the story we're gonna deal with today. This is a fun one. I hope you agree with me. In which a heretic, comes into the room and talks to Rabban Gamliel, and he has a very halachic question. He says, God has performed chalitza on you. And he has Hosea as his proof. And then the Rabban Gamliel answers back and says, let's say I agree with you that this verse talks about chalitza, talks about removing of the shoe, which obviously originally philologically this is not what the verse is about. But let's say we go with you, it doesn't work because the way the verb is being used, right? Chalat mehem, he has taken off from them the shoe, doesn't work with the halachic details of the chalitza. And this is where the story ends. Now, when I was writing my book, one of the things that bothered me the most about all of my heretic stories is that at first glance they look, let me borrow my words from Rabban Gamliel, they look foolish, right? They look weird. This is a short story that someone composed at some point, in which a heretic asks a question that looks foolish, right? That's easily refutable. What do you mean chalitza? Chalitza doesn't work this way. And this is done. Why did anyone write such a story? Why would anyone keep it in the Talmud? If it doesn't work to begin with and it's easily refutable, what's the point? And this is what was my motivation when writing my book, is to try to say, well, it looks foolish to us and we don't understand the motivation because we're missing a piece of the puzzle. What's the piece of the puzzle that we're missing? In this case, the piece of the puzzle, and this is what I will suggest in today's class, is Christian interpretation of the Chalitza ceremony. I think these stories they all look, and you can see in the 19th century, in the beginning of 20th century, scholars will look at these stories and I don't know what to do with that. They're like, oh, these are foolish or stupid Christians who don't know about Halakha and don't know about Chalitza. And the reason that they look stupid to us or they look foolish to us is because we don't understand the full picture. We don't understand that, in fact, these stories preserve rabbinic engagement with contemporary Christian understanding of the biblical verses. And in this case, if we know what the Christians are saying about the ceremony of Chalitza, taking us to Shuv, the story will become much clearer. And in fact, will present to us rabbinic engagement with contemporary Christian views. So that's my hypothesis. This is what I want to share with you. And this is what I'm going to try to do. So let's start first with sandals a little bit. So we do see in Christian interpretation, when they look at sandals, that sandals or removing of sandals are often read metaphorically, right? So let's look, for example, about Jerome, right? Jerome, one of the church fathers, and he writes a homily on Exodus, and look what he says. To grasp the mystical meaning of the Holy Spirit. As long as we're walking through the wilderness, it is necessary that we wear sandals to cover and protect our feet. But when we shall have entered the land of the promise, we shall hear with Jesus, Yoshua, the son of Nun, right? Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place upon which you are standing is holy. When therefore we enter into the kingdom of heaven, we shall have no need of sandals, or for protection against this world, but to give you a new thought, we shall follow the Lamb that has been slain for us. So Jerome looks at the verse in which Yoshua ben Nun, before he enters the land, is told by God to remove his sandals because the land he stands on is holy. And Jerome looks at it and says, you know, this is a metaphor. This is a allegorical meaning of what we Christians are saying. When the Jews were walking into the desert and they had need of the sandals, they had need of sandals because the sandals are the commandments. And when they reach the land of Israel, the promised land, they no longer need the commandments. So they take off their sandals. And the removing of the sandals by Yoshua ben Nun is the allegorical, it's the metaphor for removing the people of Israel, replaced by the Christian, who no longer need the commandments. So we see here, and this is just one of many such metaphorical reading, that the removing or sandal is perceived metaphorically, right? A sandal is not a sandal. A sandal is a metaphor for commandments, and removing of sandals means no need for actual physical commandments anymore, because we no longer need that. We have Jesus, so we don't need to do the commandments. So sandals are read metaphorically. In addition to that, you see something else used with when the early Christians are doing metaphorical reason of sandals. They also talk about the transfer of chosenness from one to another using sandals. For example, Matthew 3 says, John the Baptist is a guy who baptized people in the Jordan River, and he lives in the times of Jesus. And he says in Matthew, I baptize you with the water for repentance. But after me, says John the Baptist, comes one who is more powerful than I, whose sandals I'm not worthy to carry. Okay? He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit. So John said, I am not worthy to carry the shoes of Jesus, right? Someone who's, I am not good enough to untie his sandals. This is John, or to carry his sandals. So this is what Matthew and John. And then, so shoes, or carrying off shoes, or taking off shoes, is seen as a metaphor for worthiness, right? We actually see that in rabbinic literature as well. If you were a student, you have to remove the sandals of your master, right? So sandals or taking off shoes is something that sees as symbolically or metaphorically as transfer of authority, or signaling authority, or hierarchy, right? So who's more important than the other? So this is something that happens often. Now, this doesn't stop here, because combining the two, right, looking at sandals metaphorically, but also looking at the removing of shoes as moving dominance and moving power from one to another, is combined in the ceremony of chalitza, who is read metaphorically in early Christianity. So, for example, Gregory the Great, 5th century, he says the following about the chalitza ceremony, the taking of the shoe. And he says, it was a custom, says Gregory the Great, among the ancients, that if someone was unwilling to take the wife he should be taken, he should have come to her, the bridegroom, by right of relationship, who would undo his sandals. Okay? So he says, listen, in the Bible, right, in the custom among the ancients, if someone was unwilling to do his right and marry his sister-in-law, she would undo they would undo the sandals, right? And then Gregory takes this and reinterprets this allegorically, and he says, how did Christ appear among men and women, if not as the bridegroom? It's the only church. So Jesus is like the bridegroom. And John said of him that he has the bride as the bridegroom. Since people considered John the Christ, the fact that he denied, he was able to declare Anna's worthiness and to undo the strap of Christ's sandals. So look, Gregory connects the two, right? The chalitza ceremony and the fact that John said that he's unworthy to carry his shoe. So we see that, and Gregory, and here I'll stop here, he says the fact that John the Baptist says, I'm unworthy to carry his shoe, is connected to the ceremony of chalitza, right? The fact that John says, I'm unworthy to carry his shoe is connected to the ceremony of taking off the shoe, right? The shoe thing and removing the shoe is about who's more powerful, right? Who's more important. More than that, let's look at this guy named Chromatius. This is a long text, and we're not going to read the whole thing. But Chromatius said on Matthew, now we must focus on what is meant by these sandals from a spiritual standpoint. I'm going to go into sandals. I'm going to look carefully at sandals, says Chromatius. We know that Moses said long ago, put off your sandals from your feet, for the place in which you are standing is holy ground. Remember, this is Moses in the bush, the burning bush. He was told to take off his shoe. And also Joshua, the son of Nun, remove the latchets from your sandal, right? So we know that these two leaders, Moses and Joshua ben Nun, took off their shoes, said Chromatius. But now he's going to reinterpret this. But as to why they are ordered by the Lord to remove the sandals, we must understand the type of future truth. Now look what the movie's going to do. According to the law, if a man is unwilling to accept the wife of his brother after his brother's death, he should take off his shoe so that another may marry her and succeed by right of law. As to the commandments prefigured in the law, we find it fulfilled in Christ, who is the true bridegroom of the church. Therefore, because neither Moses, the lawgiver, nor Yeshua, the leader of the people, could be the bridegroom of the church, not without good reason, it says to them that they should remove the sandal from their feet, because the true future bridegroom of the church, Christ, was to be expected. So look at the move that Chromatius does. He says, listen, sandals are not sandals. Sandals are a sign of hierarchy. And the ceremony of chalitza, of taking off the shoe, shows that when you take off your shoe, you're basically saying we're disconnected. I'm moving this authority, the spiritual authority, to someone else, right? So we see that in the chalitza. And now look at Moses. Look at Yeshua ben Nun. They're told to take off their shoe. They take off their sandals. Why? Because they represent the old Torah. And we have a new Torah now. This is Jesus. So this is why they take off their shoe, just like in the Chalitza, when taking off the shoe means a break, a removal of what is to be done. The same thing, Chromatis connect those three and say Moses and Yeshua ben Nun take off their shoe because they no longer can represent, right, the true leaders of the church, because Jesus is, right? And taking off the sandal represents that. Having said all that, right, this is Ambrose as well. Ambrose says the same thing, right? Remove the sandals from your feet. Moses, who was chosen the leader, might be thought to be the bridegroom. It was for that reason. But Yeshua ben Nun removed his sandals. So we see the same thing that we saw, as Ambrose also says, the bride, the friend, it means alone, the husband of the church. He's the only one who's expected. So we see different Christian writers, Ambrose 4th century, Gregorian and Chromatis 5th century, Christian writers connecting the Chalitza ceremony to metaphorical and allegorical reading of Yeshua ben Nun and Moses and John saying this about Jesus, all of them saying that removal of the shoe symbolizes the removal of the old authority and moving it to someone else. Having said all that, right, this is a tautological reading of the biblical sandals that we saw in Christian writing, and the connection made between the removing of the shoe by Moses and Yeshua ben Nun on the one hand, and the statement by John the Baptist on the other, to the Chalitza ceremony we see in all those Christian writers. And the Chalitza removed the status of the graduate of Israel from the keeper of the old law and gave it to the new groom, Jesus. So this is the move that Christians do with sandals. We learn now, this is what Christians do with the ceremony of Chalitza. This is what Christian writers do with sandals, metaphorically. Having learned this in the past, 20 minutes or so, we're now experts on how Christians read the Chalitza. Now I want to go back to the Minim story and re-understand the question of the Min. My suggestion to you is that the Min here represents the Christian view of Chalitza. And this story, which looks at first sight to be idiotic or foolish or short and meaningless, is in fact a rabbinic interaction with this view of Chalitza by Christian writers. And whoever writes the story knows that and tries to combat that claim. And let's read this again. So the heretic, the Christian heretic, which represents the view we just saw in Christian writers of the time, said to Gamliel, God has taken the shoe from you. He has performed Chalitza on you. We just saw that, right? We saw Ambrose and we saw Matthew, and we saw that they were saying that. Christian writers in the 4th and 5th century were saying God performed Chalitza on you people. That he transferred his favoritism, who's his favorite son, he transferred that from the Jews to the Christians, the new Israel. And we know that this is an actual claim done by contemporaneous Christian writers. And this is the argument put in the mouth of a Minim. It's a little bit fancier than that because this is an actual use of Hosea verse to mean that, right? So Hosea is used to do that because of the Chalatz verse, but this is an actual Christian claim. And that's a serious one, right? Because the Christians are basically turning to the Jews and saying, you are no longer the favorite son, you're no longer the favorite people. We are. God loves us more. And they're using Chalitza ceremony to prove that. And I think the story represents a rabbinic anxiety from that claim. Is that true? Is the fact that we suffer now in Galut and we have a hard time means the fact that the Christianity now becomes, beginning of the 4th century, becomes the ruling religion? They have won big time in the history of the world. Does this mean that God no longer wants us? Are we no longer God's favorite? This is an anxiety-producing claim, right? But now we have the answer. So what's the answer of Rabban Gamliel? Now this is theologically wrong because we have the halacha on our side. And the halacha on our side says that he cannot perform chalitza on us because this is not how chalitza is done. He doesn't take off the shoe from us. We're supposed to take it from him, and we never did that. We never made that act. This is according to the verse. It doesn't work. So halachically, the ceremony of chalitza is not binding. Now, this is a good answer when you look at the, on the syntax of the verse in Hosea. It's a good one if you're taking rabbinic halacha. But at the end of the day, this is a story that represents two sides of the story. There's a Christian claim that we know is out there about chalitza, and there's a rabbinic answer to that. But there's anxiety there. Who God loves more, right? Who's God's chosen people? And this is what the story represents. So basically, my claim to you in this in my book is that, let's take a step back. As a historian, this story tells me a lot. It tells me a lot about what did the rabbis know about Christianity? They knew what the Christians are saying about the ceremony of chalitza. They knew very well what the Christians are using chalitza to claim metaphorically that taking off the shoe is used metaphorically to proclaim the moving of the choosiness of the people from the Jews to the Christians. That's what the Christians are saying. And the rabbis know about the claim and try to refute it by using rabbinic halacha. Now, again, I think it's an inner rabbinic argument. This is not towards the Christian. This is an inner rabbinic discussion and an attempt to deal with Christian claim. But whoever writes this, in order to write that, you need to know what the Christians are saying. So as a historian, this is extremely important for me, because now I can tell you that the rabbis, whoever wrote this story, knew about Christian claim in the 4th and 5th century. They knew about what they were saying, and they're trying to refute it. So this is a testimony to Jewish-Christian engagement over scripture that's found in this heretic story. And this is why heretic stories are so important, because they convey knowledge of Christianity by the rabbis and what the rabbis thought important enough to create a story about and put it in the Talmud for us in 2022 to read, right? So the rabbis, whoever wrote the story, knew enough about Christianity to create the story and put it in the Talmud for us to read. Okay, so far so good. Now I have one more thing to deal with. The Christian, according to this and according to the writers we wrote, say that God performed chalitza on his people. But Rabbi Daniel is right. It doesn't really work with the syntax of the verse, right? Because it says that God took the shoes from them. So how did the Christian think that this would work, right? Well, what would be a Christian answer to that, right? That's the Father Rangalia said, doesn't work according to rabbinic halacha. What would Christians say about this? Now, here I did a little bit of a plea. They read very quickly Gregory and the others. And in fact, if you read Gregory and the others, you realize something very interesting. So the Christian claim, go back to my story, the Christian claim that God has performed chalitza on his people depends on the fact that God is the one doing the chalitza. He takes off the shoe, right? Otherwise it doesn't work, right? This is exactly what my answer. But look carefully at what Gregory, which I read very quickly before, said. Let's read him again. It was a custom among the ancients that if someone was unwilling to take the wife he would be taking, he should have come to her as the bridegroom to write a relationship and would undo his sandal. When Gregory the Great described the ceremony of chalitza, he said the man takes off his own shoe. He doesn't say the woman takes off the shoe. He says the man takes his own shoe. That's weird. First, it doesn't go with the Deuteronomy that we just read. And second, it works very well with Hosea to say that God has forsaken his people, right? Because you have to take off his shoe. And this is how Gregory described. Why would he do that? And look again with chromatios, right? According to the law, if a man isn't willing to accept the wife as the brother of his brother's death, he should take off his shoes. So the Christians are reading chalitza ceremony in a different halachic matter. According to Christian halacha, in the chalitza ceremony, the man takes off his shoe and not the woman. And if read like this, the main claim here, God has performed chalitza and it works perfectly well. So what what's the right halacha, right? According to Christian halacha, this is how chalitza is being done, and this works very well with Hosea and can help the Christian claim that God has forsaken his people. Only according to rabbinic halacha, who goes by Deuteronomy, when the woman takes it off, then it's refutable. But again, look how, let's stop here for a second and talk about the story. The story represents real knowledge of Christian halacha. Not only do they use chalitza to talk metaphorically about taking off and moving the chosenness from the people to Christianity, someone who writes the story knows that Christians think that the man takes off the shoe. And they're saying this doesn't work according to our halacha in Deuteronomy, but it is what the Christians are saying. But let's talk a little bit about why would the Christians say that? Why would the Christians think that the man should take off his own shoe? For this, we have to go to the book of Ruth. And the truth is, the Bible has two ceremonies that has to do with taking off the shoe. The one is Deuteronomy, is the one that we read, and this is a rabbinic halacha when they talk about chalitza, use Deuteronomy. But taking off the shoe is found in another source as well. This is in the book of Ruth. And in the book of Ruth, obviously the story where Ruth comes back to the land of Israel, her husband dies, and her husband's brother dies, she's all alone, and she comes back to the land of Israel, and she goes, and she and Boaz, a distant relative of her husband, fall in love, and he wants to marry her. But before he wants to marry her, he calls a ceremony where he calls up and he says, is there any relatives of Ruth who wants to marry her, right? And a guy comes along, he says, hi. He says, do you want to take all her, lands and stuff? He said, I'll take the land. He said, but then you have to take Ruth as well. And he's like, I don't want to marry her because she's a Moabite, right? So Boaz says, okay, if you don't want to marry her, you have to perform this ceremony where you say you don't want to marry her, and then I'll marry her, says Boaz. But look at the ceremony and how it's described. And he says this, I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. So you redeem it. He's like, I'm fine. I'm giving up this Ruth and all this business. I cannot do it. Now look at the verses in Ruth. Now in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. So they're describing a ceremony in which a person takes off his own shoe and give it to the other side. And this was the method of legalized transaction in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself, and removed his own sandal. So we have a description of a ceremony here in Ruth that is about property and a woman, in which a person who's entitled to that, when he wants to disengage himself and says, I don't want this, and you take this away, take off his own shoe. Now the rabbis had to deal with this contradiction. Who takes whose shoe off? Does the woman take the shoe off the husband, like in Deuteronomy, or does the man take off his own shoe? There's another difference. Obviously, here it's not the brother of Ruth's husband, but a distant relative. So there's a few differences in the story. And indeed, the rabbis say the book of Ruth has nothing to do with the chalitza in Deuteronomy. This is about legal transaction. So this is not a contradiction. When you do chalitza with a wife, she takes off the shoe. But you can't ignore, and modern research has really claimed that these two ceremonies are connected, that they're closely linked, right? There's a wife that you don't want to marry, and you go to the city gates and you take off a shoe. It's very, very similar, right? Even though there's differences. So when the Christian writers write about the metaphorical reading of removing a shoe, they have what to rely on, which is the book of Ruth. Because in the book of Ruth, the description is that the person who doesn't want the other side takes off his own shoe. So then we put it very bluntly, the Christian reading metaphorically the taking off the shoe have what to rely on halakhically. If they choose the halakha of the book of Ruth to perform the chalitza, which allows them, by the way, to read Moses taking off his shoe and Yoshua ben Nun taking off his shoe and John the Baptist saying, I can't carry the shoe. It all has to be the person himself taking off the shoe. The whole metaphorical thing is based on the man himself taking off the shoe. They're not complete imbeciles because they have what to rely on in scripture, which is the book of Ruth, the description that is found in the book of Ruth. So according to Christian readers of the ceremony of Chalitza, the man takes off the shoe himself, which allows for the metaphor to work. So this is where we come back to the end. The story we found in Tractate Yevamot, according to which a heretic, a Christian heretic, comes to Rabban Gamliel and says, God has performed chalitza on you. He has disowned you. He doesn't want you anymore. And he did it through the ceremony of chalitza, works very well according to Christian halacha. And what's this halacha? This halacha is based on the book of Ruth, according to which a man takes off his own shoe to proclaim he doesn't want the other side. And they have what to rely on. And Hosea as well. He has chalatz mehem. He has withdrawn from them. He has taken off the shoe, and it works very well. And we see their metaphor being implemented on Joshua, on Moses, on John the Baptist, right? So we know they do this kind of interpretation. Whoever writes this story knows very well about Christian interpretation of the ceremony of Chalitza, knows that the Christians are using Chalitza according to the book of Ruth. The man takes off his own shoe. They know that the Christians are using Chalitza to talk metaphorically about transfer of primacy, a church of chosenness, right? They know very well. But they were answering, you fool, you are theologically mistaken. Because according to rabbinic halacha, it goes by Deuteronomy, it only works if the wife takes off the shoe, if the people of Israel takes off the shoe. So we're in the clear. And you got it completely wrong because your halacha isn't the right one. We have the right halacha and we're safe. Good answer according to rabbinic halacha, but by knowing the Christian background, and this is where I get a little bit big picture-y, if we understand rabbinic stories of heretics with Christian knowledge of what the Christians are saying in the 4th and the 5th century, and we go back and read the rabbinic story, look how we gained another perspective of the story. This story, historically speaking, is extremely important because it portrays knowledge of rabbinic authors of contemporary Christian claims of primacy, but also about rabbinic halacha, about chalitza. Whoever writes this knows about Ruth, a Christian interpretation, and what they're saying. And he portrays it in the story about a conversation between a heretic and a rabbi. And it's a conversation that's a very serious one. The Christian view is presented accurately. We can retrace it to the original Christian views. And we can say, whoever writes this knows a lot about Christianity. So if you ask me, that's the question you're asking. What's the connection between Jews and Christians? That's a pretty good knowledge of Christian tradition. Whoever writes this knows. And how does he know? There's connection between Jews and Christians in the ancient world and in the times of the rabbis. And it bothers the rabbis enough for them to create the story and for us to read it and to put it into Christian church. And for us, as readers, this is the call to read Christian interpretation in order to better understand the rabbinic creation. You need to understand to know what the Christians are saying in order to better understand what the rabbis are doing here in this story. So I conclude my talk today by saying, this is how we should read the Talmud, or this is how we should read heretic stories. The heretic stories have a lot to teach us about Jewish-Christian interaction. We can learn a lot, but we have to invest time and effort in learning what the Christian view is in order to better understand the heretic stories in the Babylonian Talmud. And once we do, the heretic story has so much to teach us about Jewish-Christian interaction in the 1st century CE and how much closer it was to the rabbis and how much they knew much more than we give them credit for and we previously know. And for that, we need to be aware of the world in which they lived in. And the stories about heretics in the Talmud is a very good window to ask that question and to learn that. So this is the class for today. And I hope we have a few minutes for questions and answers if we have any. Chaya. Hi, Sol.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
Your argument about the knowledge about Christianity and Christianity interpretation of the Bible is fine, is convincing. But isn't Rabbi Gamliel also telling you about Nevi'im? That isn't Hoshea's point exactly what the Christians accuse him of, or else he wouldn't use the word chalutz. That in the poetic language of Hosea, he's telling the Jews, God has had enough of you. You won't find him.
Good question.
Now,
So, go ahead.
it seems to me that if you push the point that this is an argument about rabbinic halacha and Christianity, the thing that gets, the topic that slips out of the middle is the Nevi'im, not the halacha, because Nevi'im don't do halacha. They do the relationship between God and man and justice.
Wonderful, good question. And the way Christian writers do, and they do it quite often, is they take the words of the prophets that talk about the disappointment, right? The prophets are very disappointed in Israel in the period of the first temple, right? And they say either during the first temple period or right after, or predicting the destruction of the first temple. And they take the words of the prophets who are very critical of Israel's behavior and warning them about what's to come, or explaining what come is a punishment. And what they do is they take the words as proof for what's happening in the time of the second temple period, right? And they often do that. They look at Jeremiah, Isaiah, and they say, this is what's happening now. When God said, I'm very upset with you, and he has turned away from you because you're misbehaving, this applies to our time too. This is like, the relationship would never restored, right? That the building of the second temple didn't restore the chosenness of the time of people that was lost in the first temple. This is a move that's across the board in all of Christian writers, where the prophets talked about the first temple period, not the second, temple period. And sometimes, by the way, the same prophet can have a horrible a nevuah prophecy about the people of Israel, but that can end, I don't know, first Isaiah and second Isaiah, the beginning of Isaiah and second Isaiah has a very different tone, because they're probably come from two different time periods where there's optimism versus pessimism about the people. And so it can, change. It doesn't matter for the Christian writers, because they pick the words that say God has forsaken his people, or will forsaken people because you're misbehaving, and they interpret it on second temple period. And that's a move they do often. And this is a move here as well, right? So you're very, very right that this is about the sentiment. Because at the end of the day, the question here between the Jews and the Christian, and you're completely right about this, and they take the words of prophets who are completely Jews, right, or Israelites at this point, and a self-criticism, right, and within an inner criticism. And they use it to say, you're bad. And the prophet said you're bad. And the result is that God has forsaken you, right? They take it all the way and they say the result is that we are the new Israel. And this stands at the heart of the Jewish-Christian arguments in late antiquity and medieval time for sure, to talk about who God loved more, right? Who's God's chosen people. Mm-hmm. And they do it. What's interesting about this story is that the rabbis do a very halachic angle on it, right? So the verb halat is interpreted here from turning away, which you're right, which is the spiritual idea, is God has forsaken his people, to a very legalistic term that means he has performed the ceremony of chalitza. And now this is important for us to know what the details of the ceremony are about, right? So what are the details of the ceremony itself? So this is why you're completely right that this is about the essence of it, of who's God's people. But the way they deal with that is through the ceremony of chalitza itself, which I think is a very interesting fact. Once I started discovering that Christians do talk about the ceremony of chalitza in connection to the bigger question of who's God's chosen people. So, good question, Sol. Thank you. Chaya, any other questions?
Evelyn Hirth. Evelyn, do you want to ask that, or if we've moved on? Let me
No,
just
I
check.
think it kind of got resolved in the discussion that followed.
Okay, in that case, I think that's it. So thank you so much, Dr. Michal Siegal. Thank you to everyone who joined us. And yeah, please check out 5783.drisha.org because we've got several things class series that are finishing up, but come for the last one, come for the last two. They're fantastic even on their own, as well as some things coming up that are starting new classes. So please check that out, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you so much.